Good morning. Welcome to our coverage of the Israel-Hamas war in the Middle East. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Coming up today, at least 300 people dead in Gaza hospital bombing, according to local authorities. Gaza's health ministry says Israel airstrike caused hospital blast, while Israeli military spokesman blames it on failed Islamic Jihad rocket launch. The United Nations, the World Health Organization, others react to Gaza hospital bombing. Thank you for joining us. Hundreds of people have died in a strike at a Gaza city hospital. News of the blast came on the eve of U.S. President Joe Biden's visit to Israel today, and with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visiting. Several ambulances were seen arriving at the Al-Shifa Gaza hospital, carrying injured people at Al-Ali Al-Arabi hospital. Hamas says the blast mostly killed displaced people. A senior official for the internationally recognized Palestinian Authority, which operates in the West Bank but not in Gaza, described it as a massacre. Health authorities in Gaza say at least 3,000 people have been killed in Israel's intense 11-day bombardment since Hamas sent hundreds of rockets into Israeli towns on October the 7th, killing more than 1,300 soldiers and civilians. Meanwhile, other reports give the figure of 500 Palestinians killed in the blast at the Gaza City Hospital on Tuesday, igniting protests in the West Bank and around the Middle East. Health authorities in the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip say an Israeli airstrike caused the blast. The Undersecretary of the Health Ministry, Youssef Abu al-Rish, says while he was standing by hundreds of bodies of children, women and men killed in the blast, Israeli army warned the hospital a few days ago. On the other hand, an Israeli military spokesman is claiming that a failed Islamic Jihad rocket launch caused the bombing at the hospital. The blast is the bloodiest single incident in Gaza since Israel launched a bombing campaign to retaliate for the October 7th Hamas terror assault on southern Israeli communities.
I can confirm that an analysis of the IDF operational systems indicates that a barrage of rockets was fired by terrorists in Gaza, passing in close proximity to the Al-Hali Al-Ma'adi hospital in Gaza at the time it was hit. Intelligence from few sources that we have in our hands indicates that the Islamic Jihad is responsible for the failed rocket launch which hit the hospital in Gaza. I repeat, this is the responsibility of Islamic Jihad that killed innocents in the hospital in Gaza.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization is condemning the attack on the Al-Ali Al-Arabi hospital in the north of the Gaza Strip, calling it unprecedented in scale. Ahmed Al-Madari, who is the regional director for the Eastern Mediterranean, says early reports speak of hundreds of fatalities and injuries. The regional director said the hospital, located in northern Gaza, was operational and that there were patients, healthcare workers, and internally displaced people there.
This attack is unprecedented in a scale, but WHO has seen consistent attacks on healthcare in occupied Palestinian territory. And just to provide you with some number, from last Saturday, we reported on 115 attacks on health, 51 of them in Gaza, with 15 health workers killed on duty, 27 injured, and 24 health facilities affected and damaged in Gaza. This is before this horrible attack on Al-Ahli Hospital.
WHO strongly condemns the attack on Al-Ahli Arab Hospital in the north of the Gaza Strip. The hospital was operational with patients, healthcare givers, and internally displaced people sheltering there. Early reports indicates hundreds of fatalities and injuries. The hospital was one of 20 in the north of the Gaza Strip, facing evacuation orders from the Israeli military. The order for evacuation has been impossible to carry out given the current insecurity, critical condition of many patients, and lack of ambulances, staff, health system bed capacity, and alternative shelter for those displaced. WHO calls for the immediate active protection of civilians and healthcare. Evacuation orders must be reversed. International humanitarian law must be abided, by which means healthcare must be actively protected and never targeted.
It is absolutely clear to all sides of this conflict where the health facilities are. It is absolutely clear. Healthcare is not a target. It should never be a target of anyone in conflict. That is enshrined in international humanitarian law. And we're seeing this breached again and again and again over the last week. And it has to stop. It must stop. We cannot leave doctors and nurses to make the choices they're having to make. It is inhuman.
Now, the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has cut his visit to Jordan short and returned to Ramallah after news of the Gaza hospital blast. He met with Palestinian leadership and described the blast as a war crime and massacre. The Gaza hospital bombing has ignited protests in the West Bank and around the Middle East. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk is urging that those responsible for the airstrike in the hospital in Gaza be held to account. The death toll is by far the highest of any single incident in the Gaza Strip during the current violence. Turk is also lamenting at least 6 people who were killed after a school from the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East was hit in Al-Maghazi refugee camp.
One million Palestinians have been displaced since the 7th of October. UNRWA sadly had lost 14 staff members who work with the agency in the Gaza Strip since the 7th of October. Many of our own staff themselves, they have been displaced. Many have taken refuge with friends and relatives, but many, many more are taking refuge in UNRWA facilities, including in facilities that were not meant to become shelters. The siege on the Gaza Strip continues. UNRWA has not been able to bring in any supplies since the 7th of October, and our own supplies are running out, and they're running out fast. Our colleagues who continue to be in Gaza, who continue to stay and deliver for people in Gaza, including those impacted by this war, are reporting that they are down themselves to 1 liter of water a day in our offices in the south, where we have relocated our center of operation. A very tragic situation on the ground. Bombardment and airstrikes continued in Gaza. Our own staff are impacted as well, terrified, very, very worried for what the next hour will bring, let alone what the next day will bring. They and us, we keep always in touch, and they tell us that they cannot even reassure their children to tell them that it's going to be okay, because maybe it's not going to be okay. We feel that the levels of desperation and frustration and exhaustion among our staff specifically increases by the hour. The longer this goes on, the longer the fatigue, the exhaustion, the frustration goes with that.
Now, the representative of Palestinians to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, is urging U.S. President Joe Biden to read a riot act to Israel and help stop, in his words, the carnage against the Palestinian people. Speaking alongside delegates from the Arab group, Mansour also reported that Jordan has cancelled the summit it was to host in Amman with President Biden and the Egyptian and Palestinian leaders to discuss the situation in Gaza.
Ceasefire. He is capable of telling Israel enough is enough. You have to stop this carnage against the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. Let this stop. Let humanitarian assistance take place. Do not displace 2 million Palestinians and push them in the direction of Jordan. And then let's begin a political horizon, as our brother from Egypt has indicated. We need a political process that will end the occupation as quickly as possible and to implement the global consensus on the two-state solution. Our state will be on the 4th of June of 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. If we start as quickly as possible moving in the direction of that option, where there is global consensus around it, then it means that those who are stubborn, who think that they can solve the problem by eliminating the Palestinian people, to wake up and to see that the only possible option is to end the occupation and to allow for the two-state solution to take place. The cancellation of the summit, first of all, President Abbas said that he cannot attend, and he went back to Ramallah, and I expect him that he is speaking to giving a national speech as we speak now. It might be in your in your outfit, in your Al Arabiya and Al Jazeera and all of them. He is talking to the Palestinian people and to everyone as we speak, I believe, and he asked for a meeting for the Palestinian leadership. So that's what he did. I understand that our Egyptian brothers canceled the hotels of their today after this massacre. Therefore, they canceled the participation, but I think my brother will speak to that. Yes, and then of course our Jordanian brothers said that we cannot have a summit with these conditions. We don't know what the other President Biden is still going there or not, but he canceled President Biden too. Okay, so that because the only thing that would make sense if he made ceasefire immediately, and I'm coming to force the implementation of ceasefire.
Now, U.S. President Joe Biden says he's outraged by the explosion at the Gaza hospital that killed about 500 people, and says he has directed his national security team to gather information about what happened. He's traveling to Israel for talks today. Now, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has described himself as horrified by the blast at the Gaza hospital that killed hundreds of people and strongly condemned the incident. Speaking at the opening ceremony of the Belt and Road Forum in Beijing, Mr. Guterres says he condemned the Hamas attacks against civilians in Israel and called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire. He says he made 2 appeals to Hamas and Israel to ease the epic human suffering.
Immediately before departing for Beijing, I made 2 urgent humanitarian appeals to Hamas for the immediate and unconditional release of the hostages, to Israel to immediately allow unrestricted access of humanitarian aid to respond to the most basic needs of the people of Gaza, the overwhelming majority of whom are women and children. They cannot justify the acts of terror against civilians committed by Hamas on October 7 that I immediately condemned. But those attacks cannot justify the collective punishment of the Palestinian people. Each of my 2 humanitarian appeals have a value in themselves. They are not bargaining chips, they are simply the right things to do. And I am horrified by the hundreds of people killed at Al-Ahli hospital this same day in Gaza by a strike that I strongly condemned earlier today. I call for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire to provide sufficient time and space to help realize my two appeals and to ease the epic human suffering we are witnessing. Too many lives and the fate of the entire region hang on the balance.
Palestinian security forces in Ramallah fired tear gas and stun grenades to disperse protesters throwing rocks and chanting against President Mahmoud Abbas on Tuesday as popular anger boiled over after the deadly Gaza hospital explosion that Palestinians have blamed on Israel. In Hebron, protesters marched carrying Hamas flags and declaring the town for Hamas. In the West Bank, where Mr. Abbas was returning on Tuesday after cancelling a planned meeting in Jordan with U.S. President Joe Biden, hundreds of demonstrators marched in Ramallah's central Manara Square, with some chanting in support of the Hamas militant leaders. Clashes with Palestinian security forces also broke in the West Bank cities of Nablus, Tubas, and Jenin, a northern city that was the focus of major Israeli military operations earlier this year. The outbreak of West Bank protests highlights long-simmering Palestinian anger against Mr. Abbas, whose forces have long faced criticism for coordinating with Israel on the border concerning security. You're watching Channels Television's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. Still ahead, a conversation with a public affairs analyst in Lagos on the matters arising, plus families of German hostages held by Hamas meet Mr. Scholz, demand action. Please stay with us. Welcome to the second half of today's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. We're now speaking with public affairs analyst Mr. Ralph Obasoje, who is joining us from Lekki in southwest Nigeria in Lagos. Good morning and thank you for being with us.
Good morning once again, Olumide.
Thank you for being with us. Let's take a You're welcome. Let's take a long, hard look at this incident at the hospital in Gaza, for which the Israelis have been blamed for an attack. The World Health Organization calls it a massacre. Hamas says it was Israel that fired a missile or rocket at the hospital. Israel, in their defense, says it's not them and it's Islamic Jihad. Now, in situations such as this, if it's Israel that did it, well, obviously they know there's going to be this sort of backlash. If it's Israel that did it, then they know that there's no military advantage to hitting that sort of target in the first place. And it's not within the ambits of the moral army conversation they've been having with the world that Israel doesn't do those sorts of things and is not targeting soft targets or any targets outside Hamas, although the operation can cause collateral effects such as casualties on the civilian population. What are your thoughts?
Olumide, let us watch how events unfold, and let us maybe the world will tell who actually did this attack. But to target an hospital and kill about 500 patients or people that were sheltering there away from danger, it's something that is condemnable. And like you said, that will remove whatever sympathy Israel may have had from certain sections of the world. But I like to analyze things practically. Is it likely that Hamas will target, or Islamic Jihad will target their own, especially in a small enclave that has already been surrounded by enemy forces? It is unlikely.
No, sorry to jump in, Mr. Obasoje. Sorry. They said that it's a misfire. The Israeli forces say they had limited information about what happened, but that what they did have indicated that it was possibly a misfire, rockets that were targeting Israel, and one of them inadvertently fell on that location inside Gaza. That was their explanation, not that they deliberately were trying to hit their own people.
Yes, but that is an account from the Israeli forces, and it is their own statement against the statement of Hamas. You know, normally the way Hamas is, they may come back to say, "Oh, it was a friendly fire." Okay, but what I'm saying is that when you look at the background, okay, the days running to this missile, Israel had been on the path of revenge. Netanyahu has been saying the Palestinians will suffer and that Israel is going to revenge. So that is why I was trying to make the building blocks to say, what is the likelihood that when you firing a long-range missile or a medium-range missile at a very close range, will it be a misfire within Gaza into an hospital that is a short distance away? Let's wait and see, because the world will tell us. The world will tell us who did this. But whichever way it is very, very unfortunate to waste the lives of innocent civilians, people that had hopes to live for tomorrow. You just offer their lives. But I would like us to look at what is happening. I was in Israel for 3 months in 2016 for a senior strategic course. And we toured all the areas of Israel. And when I went to East Jerusalem and the Palestinian parts of Galilee, I just knew that the whole territory, whether Palestinian side or the Israeli side, were all sitting on a tinderbox. And maybe when you take some of your questions further, I will be able to then drill down to the kind of things I saw when I was there in 3 months. I had trainings, lectures were delivered by retired and serving Israeli military officers. And some of us asked them some of these questions of what is going on. And if anybody did not expect this to happen, because those some of us who are sympathetic towards Israel are thinking that they are the underdogs. But I want to be dispassionate in this regard, because if we wanted peace, right from the Camp David meetings and the Camp David Accords, you then ask yourself, how come even with the UN resolutions, why has Israel not obeyed UN resolutions on the Palestinian issue? Why would you now continue to grab land? You watch TV every day, you will find Israeli settlements being expanded, Palestinians being driven away, and houses being demolished to build new Israeli settlements, especially when the need arose to then receive Russian Jews and Czechoslovakian Jews who wanted to come back home to Israel. When you go to Israel, you will find that land is very small, and it is even worse. So Israel will need more land, but it's even worse for the Palestinians. Well, if you see the congestion, and I saw kids roaming the streets and just doing nothing, no education, no nothing. In short, that was a calamity waiting to happen. And no matter what, if the world powers and every nations of goodwill, if they don't help that territory to solve this problem, it will continue to happen. The militancy you saw or you see on the part of the Palestinians, it's due to their desire to find some relief for themselves and emancipate themselves. And I think it is time to solve this.
One of the reactions to the incident at the hospital was the immediate cancellation of the expected meeting with President Joe Biden, who was supposed to be in Israel from today, by the King of Jordan
Abbas
and the other parties. Yes, indeed. And yes, a reaction also came from the representative of Palestine at the United Nations, Mr. Riyad Mansour, who spoke, amongst other things, of it being a carnage, and asking that this obviously is a pointer to the fact, or a pointer to their position, that Israel shall immediately be asked by President Joe Biden to find a diplomatic solution and come to the table where it can be further discussed, the two-state solution. The elephant in the room, and in that room, is the position of the Israelis and the present situation of the hostages of Israeli nationality and other nations who are currently being held by Hamas in Gaza. What are your thoughts?
there are rules for exchanging prisoners of war, and you will find that why did Hamas become very popular with the average Palestinian? Because there was this general feeling that Mahmoud Abbas was too docile and was too inactive and compromising. Nobody would blame Mahmoud Abbas, the way I see it, because when he saw the way Yasser Arafat went, he thought that the route of dialogue will be better. And the Hamas faction in the Palestinian coalition didn't like that, and they seized Gaza Strip. And they enjoyed a lot of support from the indigents. So, like I said, there are always building blocks. Jimmy Carter and other presidents before George Bush were very keen on finding solutions. The issue is this: you saw the speech made by the Palestinian official just now. He is saying, "Let us go to the boundary that had East Jerusalem line, dividing Israel from Palestine. Let's go back to that." You are aware that Israel seized East Jerusalem and declared Jerusalem as the indivisible capital of Israel. And you know how passionate the Palestinians are about Al-Aqsa Mosque. They will never allow that mosque to be under the jurisdiction of Israel, and Israel will administer the territory. That is at the very heart of the matter. If there's going to be a solution, I think that Camp David should be reactivated, dialogue should continue, and they should begin to speak to the fact that Israel will have to return all the territories it has seized since Camp David III. They should return to the pre-existing boundaries, the wall they have built, the wall that condemns of Palestine from the territories, the new territories Israel has seized. If they want to hold on to the territories they've seized during the Yom Kippur War, it is understandable. They are keeping Golan Heights, because Golan Heights is very critical to their own security and safety. They are holding on to Golan Heights, again, because of the fact that they want the Sea of Galilee to be in Israel. I was there. I went on pilgrimage to all those places, and you would then see why dialogue can only remain the route to finding a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian crisis.
This is very good for a discourse at the United Nations, or a general opinion on how these matters arose and what should be done. But you've not answered my question on what you think concerning the humanitarian aspect of this war. Let us also bring in, obviously, the crisis in Gaza and the hundreds of children that have been killed by the Israeli airstrikes, the people that have been displaced, hundreds of thousands, we understand 600,000 people massing at the southern border of Gaza in response to the recommendation from Israel, and the number of Israelis that are still hostages in Gaza hands. So it's all well and good, everything you've just said, but how will two parties at war come to some sort of ceasefire when these two situations have not been dealt with practically and pragmatically? Will Israel listen to anything Palestine has to say when those hostages remain in the hands of Hamas? And will Hamas listen to anything if Israel keeps bombing Gaza? So what are the practical solutions you see?
Yeah, you research issues before you even come on screen. So you've said practically in your last statement, you've said what should be done. I don't understand why Egypt has still refused to open the Rafah crossing into Egypt. Civilians are amassed at the border, like you said, more than 600,000, and they're not allowing them into Egypt to find safety. That's number one. Number two, there are hostages on both sides. Don't pretend that in short, Hamas obviously seized those people across the border to use them as, first of all, as human shields, and secondly, to then use them as bargaining chips to either release most of their commanders who are in Israeli jails. Now, what should we do? When I hear United Nations most of the times, I'm sorry, I'm one African who does not believe any longer in United Nations because they have not been effective and they are very selective in what they do. They have passed resolutions that Israel has not adhered to. Why has there not been any pressure or enforcement to ensure that Israel complied with all the resolutions? America will not do that because he who pays the piper calls the tunes. Who runs the American economy? Practically Jews. So when you then see Joe Biden right from the first day, not even looking for truce or peace, he says, "Oh, I side with Israel, and no other nation should try to intervene." And he was not virtually threatening anybody that want to help the Palestinians. And yet, he was stretching out his hand to help Israel. And I always don't, when you hear me speak on any conflict, I always speak on the side of the underdog. You cannot be providing immediate cover, sending your nuclear carrier from the Mediterranean towards Israel to then give some psychological assistance to the Israelis. And you are saying no other nation should provide or intervene or provide assistance to the Palestinians. One big key to resolving this again is the US. Just like in the Russian conflict. If the US puts pressure on Israel to say, ceasefire, I can assure you that the only reason that Israel has not actually erased Gaza is because of the fact that they don't want to hurt their own citizens who are hostages. They don't know where yet they are. If not, Israel would have already moved into Gaza Strip. So the whole world, not the UN, I don't believe in the UN, the International Red Cross Society, the International Society of the Red Cross and the Red Crescent should immediately move in, even with the dangers, to go and provide relief to the Palestinians in Gaza Strip. There's no water, there is no electricity. In fact, 2 days ago, I watched how many of them were fetching salt water pumped from a nearby sea for people to even drink. And that was very, very, very pathetic to watch. So the whole world should be, the UK has been silent on this. And those speaking, Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia called a meeting of Arab nations on this issue. I have not monitored whether the meeting has taken place, but let us begin to wait for the reactions of...
Mr. Basaje, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, on the contrary, the UK has not been silent on this. Rishi Sunak has championed the cause for humanitarian aid for the Gazans in the Gaza Strip. Rishi Sunak has condemned the actions of Hamas and called them terrorist actions, but the UK is getting behind efforts, international efforts to find some respite for the people in the Gaza Strip. Time forbids me from asking you any more questions, so we thank you for your contribution and insight this morning. Mr. Rafa Basaje, Public Affairs Analyst, who joined us from Lekki in Lagos.
Thank you very much, Olumide. You have a nice day.
You too. Now, massive crowds marched on Tehran streets till the early hours of today to protest the hospital strike, the hospital explosion in the north of the Gaza Strip that killed hundreds of people. Protesters marched from Palestine Square to the French and British embassies, rallying until 3 a.m. Tehran time. Dozens were seen setting the Israeli national flag on fire to loud cheers while chanting, "Death to Israel." Tear gas was fired near the U.S. Embassy in Lebanon at protesters who were angry after the bombing which hit the Gaza hospital. More than 100 protesters gathered near the U.S. Embassy in Orca carrying Palestinian flags. Security forces sprayed water and fired tear gas toward demonstrators who started rocking the fence. The blast drew condemnation across the Arab world, and protests were also staged at Israel's embassies in Turkey and Jordan. Meanwhile, protesters also rallied outside the French embassy in Tunis on Tuesday in support of Palestinians and to demand accountability from foreign leaders. Waving Palestinian flags, demonstrators like local politician Hama Hameni demanded the expulsion of French and U.S. ambassadors and ambassadors of what he calls aggressor countries. In a post on the social media platform X, French President Emmanuel Macron said France condemns the incident at the hospital. Last week, the U.S. Embassy in Tunisia closed to the public for routine services in an abundance of caution due to expected pro-Palestinian protests in the country. A national protest took place in Tunisia on Thursday with the participation of most of the country's political parties and groups, including the powerful labor union UGTT, which has a large popularity base. Relatives of German hostages held by Hamas asked German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to take action to secure their release after meeting with him in Tel Aviv on Tuesday. During the press conference, the families shared the priorities they laid out for Mr. Scholz during the 14-minute meeting. He met on Tuesday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel and planned to travel on to Egypt for meetings today with Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. An air raid alert in Tel Aviv forced the families to take shelter and Mr. Scholz to disembark his plane shortly before it was due to take off for Egypt late yesterday night. The incident at the Ben Gurion airport came soon after reports of Israel's airstrike allegedly on the Gaza hospital, which left around 500 people dead.
We thank you all for your empathy, for your kind words. But we are waiting for actions. We are waiting for things to be done. And that's all we ask, is that our loved ones would be back, that we at least get a sign of life from them.
In this time, really, a whole world breaks down. You don't understand. You don't get it. You said she was on the festival. What happened? Why do people behave like this? Like human, like animals. I don't know. I really have no explanation for this, but
I showed it to the Chancellor, and this is what I told him. That this is my baby daughter, Aviv, favorite doll in the grandmother's house, which she was taken from. And my vision and my hope is to come to Germany to visit him, saying thank you with this doll and my two baby girls and my wife.
Meanwhile, the Israelis around Tel Aviv say they're enthusiastic about U.S. President Joe Biden's visit today and are looking forward to the support of the superpower, as one resident described it. President Biden's complex diplomatic mission to the Middle East was supposed to be to calm the region and shore up humanitarian efforts for Gaza. But after a strike on the Gaza hospital, which killed hundreds of Palestinians on Tuesday night, Jordan canceled the planned summit with President Biden. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. Mr. Abbas also canceled plans to meet President Biden today. We now speak with Professor David Aurao of the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos in southwest Nigeria, joining us virtually from the mainland, Akoka. Thank you for being with us. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning for having me. Good morning, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. If we're to listen to the comments of the representative of Palestine to the United Nations, President Joe Biden has the magic stick. He has the trump card. He has what it takes to influence Israel to come to terms with some sort of humanitarian ceasefire. Is that accurate?
I don't think so. I don't think Joe Biden has the magic wand. And that is very clear from the response of the many Arab countries and Arab leaders in the aftermath of that attack on the hospital overnight. Some meetings that would have been held have been cancelled, and many of them are now very lukewarm and not enthusiastic about Joe Biden's visit. So I do not think that Joe Biden, has the magic wand to quickly do something that will bring this conflict to an end at this point. Again, considering the comments Joe Biden made before he left Washington for the Middle East, talking about the unflinching support for Israel and all that, all of those comments have made it difficult for the many Arab leaders to accept him as a honest broker. So I do not agree with that. Those sentiments that Joe Biden's visit will just provide a basis for some quick resolution to this crisis.
How important is the United States' support for Israel in the Middle East? Will Israel not be able to carry along without the United States? It's not as though they're not one of the strongest military forces in the world, and it's not as though they're lacking in munition or weapons. Is it also a psychological boost to their position in the Middle East, as well as a military reinforcement?
Yes, the United States is the strongest military power in the world, and the kind of support that the U.S. gives to Israel, even if Israel has enough weapons, Israel gets reassurance that should things take a turn for the worse, and some other countries come to support the Palestinians against Israel, Israel has the strongest power in the world, behind it. So it is not just the case of Israel, the Israelis versus the Palestinians. It is also the broader context. In countries like Russia, some other countries, like South Africa and others, that have expressed support for the Palestinians. If they go further than just making comments to give military support, Israel has the backing of the United States. So the support of the U.S. for Israel is very, very key to, the Middle East crisis and Israel's, approach to the conflict.
Back in the United States, scenario is unfolding at the U.S. House of Representatives, where they remain speakerless, with the expected speaker, Jim Jordan, not getting enough votes as at last count to emerge speaker, which some people had taken for granted, but 17 Republicans voted against him. This is important because those bills that require further aid to situations such as support for Israel in the Middle East has to come from the House of Representatives, and that cannot happen when they don't have a speaker. Have the incidents domestically in the United States weakened their position internationally around the world?
I'm not sure it has. Because all of this political turmoil is not something that is expected to last for a long time. So this is just a short, setback, so to speak, in terms of, America's influence around the world, its own domestic, crisis. And this is not the first time that the U.S. has gone through, political crisis like this. The fact that the crisis is not expected to last for a long time is such that will not affect the United States substantially and its influence around the world. And by the way, the provision for Israel is always there. Israel has enough. The crisis will not linger for a long time, such that what Israel needs from the United States will be disrupted by the political turmoil. So I'm not sure that the political crisis, the domestic political crisis in the United States, will have so much impact on how Israel approaches the crisis in the Middle East and the America's ability to be able to turn things one way or the other, as far as the crisis is concerned.
So much grief, so much woe, so many tears amongst the displaced in Gaza. Hundreds of people, thousands of people killed, including children, including women. Hospitals suffering collateral damage. We saw what happened at this hospital yesterday in the Gaza Strip. For Egypt, who are being criticized for not opening the Rafah crossing, I listened to a senior Egyptian official who says that there is a situation right now at the Rafah crossing that has developed where there's damage to the crossing, and that Egypt already has about 9 million refugees from other nationalities. And why are they being criticized if they're not opening the crossing to admit more refugees to compound their already complex internal situation when they are ready for aid to be passed through said border when Israel is obviously agrees to it?
Yeah, it's a bit surprising given the emergency. It's a bit surprising, but what is very clear in all of this is that each country is protecting its own, protecting its own interests, defending its interests, and not willing to make sacrifices any further. The fear is that if they come in, they will not likely go back, and if they come in, they may cause problems. Not only Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, virtually all the countries. No country is willing to accept these refugees. But let me just make this additional comment that the solution to this problem is not in countries actually taking refugees. Taking refugees will just be an emergency solution, the immediate solution. But the long-term solution lies with Israel and the Palestinians. This crisis has lingered for 75 years, and they have followed the same path in trying to approach it, and it hasn't yielded fruit. Why don't they do something different? France and Germany were in this kind of condition from 1870 to 1945, 75 years as well. When they saw that the approach to it was not working, they chose a different path. Before then, they thought that they would remain perpetually rivals in Europe. But they came to recognize that they could work together to be partners. After the end of World War II, they followed that path. And today, it is inconceivable to think that Germany will go to war with France. Israel and the Palestinians can do the same thing. The problem is the extreme position on both sides, not wanting to tolerate the other. And they are neighbors. Unless and until they do that, there will be no solution to the problem. The Palestinians would have had their states in 1947, when that Resolution 181 of the United Nations was passed. It provided for two-state solution. The Israelis accepted it. The Palestinians rejected it. The Arab League stood firmly against it. And see where they are 75 years later. What they should have got easily in 1947, they have not got in 2023. For the Israelis, the same thing. They think, exercise of power is adequate to guarantee peace. It does not. The ease with which the Palestinians were able to attack Israel on the 7th of October shows that kinetic approach alone is inadequate. So Israel too needs to accept the reality of a Palestinian state being formed and both sides accepting to live in peace with each other. When that takes place, the map is very complicated. You have some Israelis on the Palestinian side, some Palestinians on the Israeli side. These things can be worked out. Look at, take for instance,
Professor, so sorry, we have to stop you there. Obviously, Pandora's box has opened in the Middle East, and we're trying to get all the boogeymen back in, but we hope that this begins to see some light of day. Thank you so much, Professor David Awarawa, Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos, who joined us from Lagos.
Thank you very much, Olumide. Have a nice day.
You too. And finally, a U.S. space engineer fears for his parents' lives after the elderly couple became trapped in Gaza when Israel launched the bombing campaign against the territory in retaliation for Hamas assault on Israeli communities on October the 7th. Palestinian Mohammed El-Basyini, 75 years of age, a retired surgeon, and his wife, Alia El-Basyini, also, who is 68 years, lived in Gaza for about 20 years, just before settling 12 years ago in Germany, where they are citizens and where Laye, their child, was born. In June, they traveled to their house in the town of Beit Hanun in northern Gaza to visit family, planning to return to Germany in November. After Israel ordered all civilians to leave the northern half of Gaza last week, They made the journey south with thousands of other people to Gaza City, where Mohammed has an unused clinic. They've been sheltering there ever since, unable to walk far and afraid to leave.
It's like, I think it might be without my parents. It's like, I don't think this is normal. Just think that every time I talk to them, it kind of be the last time. It's like, how should I feel? I don't know anything about my parents for like 7 days. I just talked to them for a minute. My brother told me don't talk to them more than a minute because their phone battery gonna run out. And then we're not gonna know anything. I don't know, how should I think? How would you think? How would you feel? I mean, they don't have food. I mean, my parents were supposed to leave back to Germany in November. So, I mean, in a couple more weeks, they're just visiting Gaza. And so they don't really have any stock of food. You know, I mean, it's really, really dire situation. Like they just say death everywhere. You can smell it. You can smell, you can smell people under buildings.
Just before we go, Australia has repatriated over 200 passengers aboard the government's first assisted departure flight from Israel, which arrived in Sydney on Tuesday. Another Australian assisted departure flight is expected to return to Australia today. The U.S. State Department will continue to offer government-sponsored charter flights to Europe from Tel Aviv to help Americans leave Israel through at least Sunday.
It's a mixed emotion, guilt today. Country to live here, and all the way through, Australia was taking care of us, and it was amazing.
So much guilt, and you feel so much guilt and like leaving that it's you got left family and
friends,
right. And there's so much family over there that are in such a difficult situation. And, yeah, it's so hard.
We went for a tabernacle, Feast of Tabernacle, where all the Christian nations come and praise over there. And then the bomb started. We stuck. We missed our flight, and here we are. And here we are.
And that's where we leave it for this morning's coverage of the Israel-Hamas war. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Stay with Channels Television for all the news throughout the day. See you again.